1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 Bs. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, but whenever I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made blood-sucking freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Here, and more important, welcome to the home of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. Now, in just a few minutes, we'll be watching one of the most controversial flicks of the last 30 years, banned in several states. It played as a second feature at drive-ins for more than 15 years. For the first time on the video screen, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? The 1965 bloody amputee classic, 2000 Maniacs. This was only the second movie in history to show explicit gore on the screen. It was considered too tasteless for anywhere except drive-ins and some porno movie theaters in downtown Chicago and Times Square. So for years, you had to be wearing a raincoat or a baseball cap to even see this movie. But thanks to the most ambitious project in the history of film, which is called the Sleaziest Movies in the History of the World Project, we have it for you. Intact, uncut, unedited, in all its disgusting Technicolor glory. And it stars Connie Mason, this Playboy playmate who couldn't act her way out of a potato sack if she had a rattlesnake in there with her. And it was made in 3 weeks in the town of St. Cloud, Florida by Herschel Gordon Lewis. Y'all have heard me talk about him before. Herschel was a Chicago advertising executive who made movies on the side. Now, first he made nudist camp movies. You remember those. Back before you could show naked women on the screen, you had to disguise them as documentaries. So you'd make these movies of people sprawled out in the bushes but naked. And you'd have the narrator talk about how this was the sun worshippers' lifestyle. You know, real ugly naked people in those movies. And he made a bunch of money doing that. And then the market dropped out on those, and he turned to ripping people's tongues out on camera. It was sort of a natural evolution of his artistry. Now, the first gore movie he made was Blood Feast, which is also part of our Sleaziest Movies series. But the most famous gore movie he ever made was 2000 Maniacs. Do you remember this down here? This is the actual boulder from 2000 Maniacs. I want to show you. This, we had trouble getting this into the studio, but I wanted to put this up here so I can talk about it later. But anyway, this is the boulder that in the movie 2000 Maniacs is placed directly over this struggling, screaming woman whose arms and legs are tied up so she can't move. And the boulder is put on a ledge like this, where it's just about to tip off of the ledge like that. and the townspeople are throwing rocks at the boulder trying to make it fall off to see who has the best pitching arm. You know, and it's pretty similar to the things that have been done in movies before, like where the girl is tied up on the railroad tracks. Now, the only difference is that in a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie, the girl on the railroad tracks would get her body cut in 3 pieces by the train, and then we would see close-ups of what she looked like. So, anyhow, if you don't remember the boulder, you will after you watch this movie, because Herschel made this movie because Blood Feast made so much money, and then he thought, wow, well, if that made money, what if I made a movie even more disgusting with more blood and guts in it? I mean, what if I had people being torn limb from limb by wild horses? And what if we put somebody in a barrel and drove these real sharp steel spikes into the barrel and then rolled the barrel down the hill? In other words, Herschel wanted to reach out as an artist, and he did. He decided to spend 3 weeks making 2,000 Maniacs instead of his usual 5 days. So he went to the town of St. Cloud in the Orlando area, where the citizens welcomed him with open arms because they had no idea what kind of movie he was making. And he made up this story about a rebel town in Georgia that was wiped out by Yankees in 1865, and now it appears out of the mist every 100 years, like Brigadoon, only instead of the people breaking into song and dance like in Brigadoon, they wait for Yankee tourists out on the highway, lure them into town, and then cut their legs off. So anyway, it's different, it's fun, it has some of the worst acting in the history of the movies, and the special effects that Friday the 13th would be copying 15 years later. This movie had such a large underground cult following that in the 70s, when Herschel went to Milan, Italy for a speaking appearance, the Italian audiences could mouth the words along with the actors. This is one of the most, I can't get over how famous this movie is. I want you to pay attention, I want you to watch this. This is one of the most famous movies in the history of one of the most famous movies in the history of the drive-in. So, could we have a little silence, please, for the classic 2,000 Maniacs? Oh, boy, you know, you've got to admit, 2,000 Maniacs could happen. I mean, I'm from... told them not to do the gall-darn rock gimmick. I tell you what, I'm from the South, so I can testify to all the Yankees watching that, yes, we do stuff like that. You know, in the last 23 years, there have been a whole lot of movies based on that theme about you're driving through a small town in the South, you're wondering what kind of horrible things would happen to you if you stopped, and then you stop, and the things are even more horrible. That's basically the plot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You know, The Shining even has some of that stuff in it. But in 2,000 Maniacs, Herschel Gordon Lewis did it first. And I also want to mention that quicksand scene there at the end. It's amazing the power of quicksand, especially when it looks like it's only about 6 inches of scum water in a drainage ditch, but it was enough to pull Harper plumb down to the bottom, wasn't it? Well, Herschel was just getting rolling when he made 2,000 Maniacs. From then on out, he made at least one gore movie a year for the next 7, 8 years. He made Color Me Blood Red, A Taste of Blood, The Gruesome Twosome, The Gore Girls, and then he started branching off into even weirder stuff, like he made this movie Linda and Abilene, the first all-nude Western. It was filmed at Spawn's Ranch in California, that place that would later become famous as the home of the Charles Manson family. But that's another story as we continue the only video series that attempts to define the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. I'm Joe Bob Briggs. Friday. I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that the town of Paradise Valley, Georgia, with its 2,000 maniac citizens, has vanished once again into the swamps of the South. The falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die.